Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's Omnibus edition. One that I'm doing my dressing gown at 6 o'clock in the morning because I'm up for work for other reasons. It's the joys of what I do, funny hours sometimes. In fact, today I've got a trip to go to see a whole bunch of underwater things, a concert at Mission Bay, and a movie at Monte Cecilia Park. It's a pretty hectic Saturday. So, yeah, I figured I'd get this out of the way while I'm up and about. Anyway, this has been a really fascinating week. We saw Andrew Bailey quit, and we don't know if he would have been fired because the Prime Minister wouldn't answer the damned question, which led to what is probably one of my favourite openings ever for a video that I've done, which got created with a little help from AI, to be fair, but it is so silly and so ridiculous, and I just enjoyed making it. But it has been another very strange week with very strange things happening. So yeah, feel free to sit back and enjoy the Omnibus. If you haven't already, feel free to hit that like button or share the video or subscribe to the channel. Or if you want to see things early, feel free to become a paid member because you get early access to stuff. And I'm working on some specific content for that as well for paid members. Just showing you how busy I am. I don't just sit in the office all day. I do get out and about. Anyway, I will talk to you guys later. In the meantime, enjoy the video. Hello there, kia ora. Did you know that Andrew Bailey may have made history last week when he stood down from his portfolios after an incident, that's incident with inverted commas, with a staff member just 5 months after calls for his resignation for calling a former Defence Force member a loser and told him to go get drunk while visiting a Marlborough winery, in what Bailey himself said was behaviour unbecoming of a government minister. But since government ministers are now calling for Mexicans to be deported, policing the use of the word Aotearoa, using quick Google searches to sell more tobacco products, trying to get rid of protections that help look after our kids in school, and denying links to former political party presidents convicted of sexual abuse of minors, well, that phrase isn't exactly a glowing endorsement these days. Okay, let's get some context here. On Friday, Bailey, the MP for Port Waikato, handed in his notice after a complaint laid to Ministerial Services about his actions in a meeting on the 18th of February, after what is being described as an animated conversation happened, where he placed his hands on a staff member's upper arm. There was a bit of an internal investigation by Ministerial Services, the Prime Minister was told, and on Friday night, Bailey resigned. Since National came to power, Bailey has been the Minister for Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Statistics, and Small Business and Manufacturing. And in January, in the Cabinet reshuffle, he was also made Minister for ACC, which means he wasn't the Minister for ACC when they announced 300 people were having their jobs cut in May last year, but he was the Minister in charge when they announced 10% of the Commerce Commission would be axed for those landlord tax breaks, just as the government started making noise about needing more competition for supermarket players to bring down the costs of living. A quick fix to help landlords and a slow one for the rest of us, which is a bit of a recurring theme with this government. After last year's winery incident, Bailey apologised, and the Prime Minister said, "Cool, I'm sure you learnt your lesson and will never do this again." Then last week, Bailey got a bit too physical with a ministry staff member, and on Friday he resigned his portfolios for it. And then on Monday he told the media he'd resigned. And it's probably a total coincidence that something internal that makes the government look bad was responded to relatively quickly, while something external that happened to other people was ignored until it went away. But how does this make history? Well, MPs resigning from portfolios is not uncommon. It happens under most administrations for reasons I'm sure the MPs involved would rather not go into. But it doesn't often happen so quickly. Our shortest ever term for a Prime Minister was Henry Sewell for 14 days in 1856. But when it comes to portfolio holding ministers who aren't the Prime Minister, not that our Prime Minister holds portfolios, well, 28 days may be a new record for the country. The fact is, he abused a member of the public and seemingly got tipsy on the job, and the Prime Minister still had confidence in him and allowed him to keep his portfolios and gave him another one. So just how animated was this animated conversation if it means he had to resign from those roles? Well, in Bailey's own words, it was all because he was just so passionate about driving change. He was impatient in his portfolios, which sounds like the sort of thing you'd expect from a victim of domestic abuse to say when they're trapped and they need help. They're under so much pressure and only want to do what's best for us. when the reality is that this wouldn't have occurred if 5 months ago the Prime Minister had demoted Bailey for his actions at the winery instead of enabling him. Kia ora. The last 24 hours have been a really fascinating lot to sit down and watch some really shitty behaviour on display in both professional and unprofessional ways, and I'm not referring to Andrew Bailey here. On Tuesday morning, Te Atatu MP Phil Twyford's office was used as a dumping ground for someone venting their frustration. Now, Twyford claims that he's pretty sure this is in response to his public calls and actions to see Destiny Church have its charitable status revoked after Destiny-linked thugs overran a community centre in his electorate during Pride celebrations, allegedly assaulted some attendees and scared the living shit out of a heap of people, including children, because a performer was teaching kids about the science behind rainbows. And to be fair, there is no direct evidence that's been made public that confirms that what greeted Twyford is connected directly to Destiny Church. His office are sending security footage to the police, and they'll do the mahi to identify what happened. But when approached for comment, well, the Destiny spokesperson said that Destiny members would never do anything like that. Of course, the church's members have never felt emboldened enough to take actions into their own hands to intimidate the public. No, not at all. Never happens. Ever. In fact, the Destiny Church man-up member who tried to stand over me and fight his rage enough to not hit me in public on camera outside the Glenfield Mall for pulling the fingers to his vision sign during the election was probably just really passionate. Like Andrew Bailey levels of passionate. Oh, and for those that are listening to this on podcast or background noise, you're missing out on the slideshows of the news stories that make my last few statements seem really sarcastic. And of course, this isn't like painting over a rainbow crossing where Brian Tamaki claimed he knew nothing about it in advance and then admitted that he gave the orders for that to happen and faced no repercussions whatsoever. But that wasn't the only example of shitty behaviour on display yesterday. David Farrier revealed in his Webworm publication that Wellington legal company Franks Ogilvy recently sent out warning letters to places that they thought were providing gender-affirming care, putting them on notice that they may end up being legally liable for providing said care. The letters were sent out on behalf of a group calling themselves Inflection Point NZ. Last year, this group organised a gender-critical event in Wellington with guest speakers like Posey Parker, Brian Tamaki, and the Landry sisters to complain about trans people. Now, the group itself is somewhat mysterious. There's very little about them online other than an interview with Sean Plunkett where one of the group claims that they're just three concerned parents who somehow managed to score a booking at Takina and wanted to have a discussion with people who go out of their way to hate on trans people and persecute them and vilify people who aren't offended by people living their best life as woke. There's some interesting moving parts here too. The Franks in the name of the legal company is Stephen Franks, a former ACT MP and National Party candidate who thought the illegal Wellington occupation was lovely, that Christopher Luxon is a coherent speaker and spends a lot of time supporting the Anglosphere while criticising Māori. And according to Te Whatu Ora, there is no legal standing behind the letter and they will support anyone who needs it if this is taken any further in both legal ways and emotional support if it's required. Over February and March, Pride events happen all over Aotearoa, which heightens the public profile of the events and the communities that they support and celebrate. And with no vaccine mandates or lockdowns and a government that has a large contingent of cookers in it already pushing a shit ton of the ideological viewpoints that these groups use to platform themselves and rage farm with, they're now ramping up their attacks on what they see as easy targets to make people hate. The rainbow community is often one of their targets. How else would we know that the gay community are responsible for fault lines, after all? But rhetoric and culture war bullshit being imported from the US is being used to do this with less concern for their own public image and no concern for public safety from the groups that push it. And as much as these groups have piddly numbers supporting them and tend to crash and burn when they try and get to the wider public and get them on their side with their bile-filled hate speech, they keep being shot down by the public, who are, on the whole, over their hate-filled shitty behaviours and scare tactics. It's kind of like little kids who don't know how to share toys getting all angry and upset that nobody is playing with them. which actually feels kind of accurate when you think about some of the people behind these threats. So, it's the Doomsday scenario. Hello there, kia ora. It's the Doomsday scenario in many ways for a National Party Prime Minister. The idea of losing their most influential mouthpiece, a man who even found a way to side with John Key when it was revealed that he'd been pulling ponytails of waitstaff at a cafe. Is it any wonder that the Prime Minister was quick to jump on a plane to Vietnam, where he'll be under a bit less scrutiny for his interview, where he struggled to say that he would have fired Andrew Bailey if he hadn't resigned on Friday? Or maybe his handling of the event could have been faster, or kept the public more aware of what changes were happening. Instead, even with Mike Hosking giving him the most basic of prompts like, "So would you have fired him if he didn't quit?" the Prime Minister spouted corporate jargon and spoke in circles with his "what I say to you is" isms and "let me be very clear" without actually answering the questions, asked multiple times, for 3 minutes. It was so bad, it flustered Hosking, a man who wasn't even flustered when Cyclone Gabrielle bore down on the country, causing widespread destruction and loss, claiming it was just like a really windy day in Wellington. And just in case you're a little concerned that Mike might be going woke in his old age, other topics he's covered in his opinion piece videos this month, Mike's Minute, which is clearly labelled as his opinions despite what multitudes of his listeners seem to think. They include a lament on the waste that is the public service, how David Seymour trying to drive a Land Rover up Parliament steps despite being told twice that he wasn't allowed to wasn't such a bad thing. Shock that a union was right about anything. Banks should stop being woke when it comes to climate change. Foreign buyers are good, and Donald Trump is crazy. Crazy good, that is. And the issue here isn't just that the Prime Minister had a bad interview with the most listened to pro-national media personality in the country. It's that he was called out for being unpopular, for tanking in the polls, for being ineffective in the role by a man who does, for all his faults and clear bias, command an impressive audience of people who still listen to linear broadcast radio and think kids have it too easy these days. On the back of a situation with an MP which was managed kind of poorly, after a month that included 2 really awful polls for National that would see them out of power if a snap election happened, being overshadowed by the current acting Prime Minister numerous times, a visible rise in misogyny from men in his coalition, racism from his coalition partners, in a country where, despite claims he was all about the laser focus on the cost of living, newspapers are running stories like this about why we, as a dairy-producing country, have to suck up the fact that as consumers the price of cheese is skyrocketing, along with rates, rents, power, water supplies, and fuel costs. We're seeing record levels of people leaving, record levels of unemployment rises, our tamariki are having to deal with goop being fed to them in schools, and those in state care seeing a rise in abuse cases. A man reviled by the majority of New Zealanders for his calls to violence and targeting marginalised communities is out there celebrating this government's new citizens' arrest powers announced yesterday, and public servants are leaving the ship at record rates. So sure, it's a doomsday scenario for the National Party. Never has a Prime Minister lost confidence in their most vocal supporter so publicly and so quickly. One with a whole heap of influence with his core base of voters. And sure, the hardcore, dyed blue in the rinse supporters will find ways to justify Luxon's approach. But there is a heap of others out there who will be paying attention to what Hosking is saying and starting to worry, even if they're buried in a super secret underground bunker somewhere. Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's The News. Last weekend, 3 Chinese warships were being monitored and tracked through international waters in the Tasman Sea by the Australian and New Zealand military after it was revealed that they were there unannounced with no prior warning given by the Chinese government. Said Defence Minister Judith Collins, seen here praying that people forget her husband is Samoan, so talofa. Yes, it's true we did want to entice more Chinese visitors to the country, but the nice Chinese people who are one of our largest trading partners, not the scary ones with more military hardware on a single ship than we have in the entire country. The Ministry of Primary Industries launched an investigation into the school lunch program this week. The complaint involves meals for those with specific dietary requirements, with vegetarian meals containing meat and halal meals containing ham received by some schools. Said David Seymour, minister in charge of the program, seen here next to a convicted sex offender talking about how people just want to play the victim these days. They all got free things from the government that they didn't ask for. They should be thanking us, since we didn't tip off the Taxpayers Union about them. MPI has announced that they will no longer be sending new staff to New Zealand First MP Mark Patterson's office, but have been very clear that it is not the minister directly responsible for the issue. Said Patterson, seen here confused as to why he has a microphone when Winston Peters and Shane Jones told him that they'd do all the talking. As a member of New Zealand First, I thought it was my job to stir shit, but I didn't realise it was figurative and not literal, and all I can do is apologise for the smell. New citizens' arrest powers that seem to promote vigilantism that were this week announced by Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith, seen here super excited to be in this week's The News more than once this week, have been criticised by retail groups and the Police Association for putting the public at extra risk, while seemingly circumventing the issue of not being able to find new recruits to join the police force. While there are public concerns that groups linked with sovereign citizen beliefs and Destiny Church are celebrating this law as a win, granting them powers to intimidate and threaten people who oppose them without ramifications, which is clearly really different to what happens right now, Batman costume sales have skyrocketed since the announcement. Paul Goldsmith, seen here suddenly realising that maybe being mentioned twice in this week's The News this week may not actually have been a good thing, announced a bill on extending parliamentary terms to 4 years. If it passes the Select Committee stage and is passed, a referendum could be held in the 2026 election to come into effect in the term afterwards. Said both Chris's, seen here discussing polling numbers that put Labour in the lead over National, we support a 4-year term, if it's us in power, but can you imagine the other side for 4 years? This week saw another round of verbal submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill. So far, the vast majority of submissions have opposed the divisive bill for a range of reasons, including legal ramifications, race relations, treaty settlement issues, social cohesion impacts, and institutional trust between treaty partners. So, of course, mainstream media has been platforming the worst possible people who are the minority that support the bill. Disgraced lawyer and leader of the Outdoor Freedom Party, Sue Gray, seen here at the illegal Wellington occupation asking then Speaker Trevor Mallard to turn up the nickelback so everyone could enjoy it, was this week fined for breaching a name suppression order by the Lawyers and Conveyances Disciplinary Tribunal. In 2022, Gray was a vocal proponent against the use of vaccinated blood for a newborn known as Baby W. Under the current laws, any legal case that involves a minor has automatic name suppression for the child and parents to ensure privacy for the child. But Gray joined a live stream with disgraced former journalist Liz Gunn, seen here laughing all the way to the bank that allegedly has $40,000 less in the New Zealand Loyal bank accounts than before she visited the bank, where she named both the child and parent, which led to a wave of conspiracy theorists, some of which who want to be your local body elected representatives, also breaking the law and breaching name suppression. Gray was fined $1,500 for the transgression in order to pay $10,000 in costs. Said Gray, it's really hard to get idiots to give you money when there's so many others out there grifting. Asking, and are far better at it. So to support my cause, please leave unmarked notes in an envelope on my doorstep. Invercargill City Council has reported an increase in threatening behaviour and abuse with a rise of 29% since 2022. The majority of these have been through council phone systems, but animal control and parking enforcement officers have also noticed a marked increase. Said Invercargill Mayor Nobby Clark, seen here agreeing that it's not fair that people are so mean to a racist homophobe who said God had told him to become an evangelical minister on a beach in a conversation he claims that really happened. who once called firefighters second-class citizens, verbally attacked an event MC, criticised young people in authority, complained about Māori at a Julian Bachelor anti-co-governance till a stop, repeatedly used the N-word in an interview with Guy Williams where he also spouted homophobic slurs, and told Mana Whenua members that they had black privilege when he tried to remove speaking rights in council. Well, I have no idea why people would think that sort of behaviour has been normalised, but I'm quitting in October, so it's not my fucking problem. The government this week lauded its efforts to lower violent crime with a press release using police statistics that don't measure violent crime from a Twitter account as a source, said Police Minister Mark Mitchell, seen here wondering if anyone would bother fact-checking his claims and realising that they fired all the fact-checkers to pay for tax cut for landlords. We said we'd use evidence to make our decisions. We never said that it had to be accurate or even honest evidence. Climate Change Minister Simon Watts, seen here overlooking what historians will one day call historically known as a beach before they vanish due to man-made climate change, has come under fire from environmental groups for saying that the Paris Climate Accords are really for big countries, not for ones our size. He followed that up with, thankfully because of rising sea levels, we'll get to be even smaller and less bound by climate change agreements, so it won't impact us at all. Private Cook Strait ferry operator Blue Bridge has cancelled 2 days of sailings over the past few days. Said a Blue Bridge spokesperson, well, at least there's up-to-date modern ferry options available from Inter-Islander that never seem to have any mechanical issues for when these things happen, and bigger, better ships due to arrive later this year. And finally, on Wednesday afternoon, an Air New Zealand flight from Auckland to New Plymouth reportedly became an impromptu delivery suite as an expectant mother gave birth mid-flight. Upon arriving in New Plymouth, the mother and child receive medical care and are expected to be fine. Air New Zealand are yet to confirm if they'll be charging her for an extra seat or extra carry-on. And that is this week's The News. Hey, thanks again for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. It's kind of fascinating how each week there's always something to be able to make videos about. It gets a little depressing sometimes, and it looks like the school lunches are going to be the gift that keeps on giving for quite a while, unfortunately. Anyway, as I said at the beginning, don't forget to hit that like button, share the video, or subscribe to the channel, or consider becoming a paid member. That works too. Until next time, look after yourselves, live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and I will catch you guys all later. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.